Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next startling and astounding, amazing, episodic chapter of the next section of the story of the reading cow from another world on a planet reading bedtime stories thing. This is that it is that yeah. The We're continuing the story of Coriolanus, who last time, if you remember, he was exiled and he dreamed only of slaughtering all the people in his country for revenge. So he rallied the enemies of Rome together and led the expedition, and they took so much booty and slaughtered so many people, and then they fled off to safety, retired to safety. And now, so we continue with the next chapter. But when the whole strength of the Volscians was brought together in the field with great expedition and alacrity, it appeared so considerable a body that they agreed to leave part in garrison for the security of their towns, and with the other part to march against the Romans. Marcius now desired Tullus to choose which of the two charges would be most agreeable to him. Tullus answered that he knew Marcius to be equally valiant with himself, and far more fortunate. He would have him take the command of those that were going out to the war, while he made it his care to defend their cities at home. Hey, it's more safe. Yeah, and provide all conveniences for the army abroad. Marcius, thus reinforced, with much stronger than before, moved first towards the city called Circaeum, a Roman colony. He received its surrender and did the inhabitants no injury. Passing thence, he entered and laid waste the country of the Latins, where he expected the Romans would meet him, as the Latins were their confederates and allies, and had often sent to demand succors from them. The people, however, on their part, showing little inclination for the service, and the consuls themselves being unwilling to run the hazard of battle, when the time of their office was almost ready to expire, they dismissed the Latin ambassadors without any effect, so that Marcius, finding no army to oppose him, marched up to their cities, and having taken by force Teleria, Lavici, Peda, and Bola, all of which offered resistance, not only plundered their houses, but made a prey likewise of their persons. Meanwhile, he showed particular regard for all such as came over to his party, and, for fear they might sustain any damage against his will, encamped at the greatest distance he could, and wholly abstained from the lands of their property. After, however, that he had made himself master of Bola, a town not above 10 miles from Rome, where he found great treasure, and put almost all the adults to the sword, and went on this the other Volscians that were ordered to stay behind and protect their cities, hearing of his achievements and success, had not patience to remain any longer at home, but came hastening in their arms to Marcius, saying that he alone was their general and the sole commander they would own. With all this, his name and renown spread throughout all Italy, and universal wonder prevailed at the sudden and mighty revolution in the fortunes of two nations, which the loss and the accession of a single man had effected. All at Rome was in great disorder. They were utterly averse from fighting, and spent their whole time in cabals and disputes and reproaches against each other, until news was brought that the enemy had laid close siege to Lavinium, where the image tutelar gods, and from whence they derived the origin of their nation, that being the first city which Aeneas built in Italy. These tidings produced a change as universal as it was extraordinary in the thoughts and inclinations of the people, but occasioned a yet stranger revulsion of feelings among the patricians. The people now were for repealing the sentence against Marcius and calling him back into the city, whereas the Senate, being assembled to reconsider the decree, opposed and finally rejected the proposal. Hmm, Turn the tables. either out of the mere humor of contradicting and withstanding the people in whatever they should desire, or because they were unwilling, perhaps, that he should owe his restoration to their kindness, or having now conceived a displeasure against Marcia himself, who was bringing distress upon all alike, though he had not been ill-treated by all, and was become a declared enemy to his whole country, though he knew well enough that the principal and all the better men condoled with him and suffered injury. This resolution of theirs being made public, the people could proceed no further, having no authority to pass anything by suffrage, and enacted for a law without a previous decree from the Senate. When Marcius heard all this, he was more exasperated than ever, and quitting the siege of Lavinium, marched furiously towards Rome, and encamped at a place called the Cluilian ditches, about 5 miles from the city. The nearness of his approach did indeed create much terror and disturbance, yet it also ended their dissensions for the present, as nobody now, whether consul or senator, durst any longer contradict the people in the design of recalling Marcius. But seeing their women running affrighted up and down the streets, and the old men in prayer in every temple with tears and supplications, and that, in short, there was a general absence among them both of courage and wisdom to provide their own safety, they came at last to be all of one mind, that the people had been in the right to propose as they did a reconciliation with Marcius, and that the Senate was guilty of a fatal error to begin a quarrel with him when it was a time to forget offences, and they should have studied rather to appease him. It was therefore unanimously agreed by all parties that ambassadors should be dispatched, offering him return to his country, and desiring he would free them from the terrors and the distresses of the war. The persons sent by the Senate with this message were chosen out of his kindred and acquaintance, who naturally expected a very kind reception at their first interview upon the score of that relation and their old familiarity and friendship with him, in which, however, they were much mistaken. He was murderously furious, folks. Murderously. Being led through the enemy's camp, they found him sitting in state amidst the chief of men of the Volscians, looking insupportably proud and arrogant. He bade them declare the cause of their coming, which they did in the most gentle and tender terms, and with a behavior suitable to their language. When they had made an end of speaking, he returned them a sharp answer, full of bitterness and angry resentment, as to what concerned himself and the ill usage he had received from them. But as general of the Volscians, he demanded restitution of the cities and the lands which had been seized upon during the late war, and that the same rights and franchises should be granted them at Rome, which had been before accorded to the Latins, since there could be no assurance that a peace would be firm and lasting without fair and just conditions on both sides. He allowed them 30 days to consider and resolve. The ambassadors, being departed, withdrew his forces out of the Roman territory. Those of the Volscians who had long envied his reputation and could not endure to see the influence he had with the people, laid hold of as the first matter of complaint against him. Among them also was Tullus himself, not for any wrong done him personally by Marcius, but through the weakness incident to human nature. He could not help feeling mortified to find his own glory thus totally obscured and himself overlooked and neglected now by the Volscians, who had so great an opinion of their new leader that he alone was all to them, while other captains, they thought, should be content that share of power which he might think fit to accord from hence the first seeds of complaint and accusation were scattered about in secret, and the malcontents met. They had a dangerous meeting, and heightens each other's indignation, saying that to retreat as he did was in effect to betray and deliver up, though not their cities and their arms. Yet what was as bad, the critical times and opportunities for action, on which depend the preservation or the loss of everything else, since in less than 30 days space, for which he had given respite for the war, there might happen the greatest changes in the world. Yet Marcius spent not any of the part of the time idly, but attacked the confederates of the enemy, ravaged their land, and took from them 7 great and populous cities in that interval. The Romans in the meanwhile durst not venture out to their relief, but were utterly fearful, and showed no more disposition or capacity for action than if their bodies had been stuck with a palsy. struck with a palsy, and became destitute of sense and motion. But when the 30 days were expired and Marcius appeared again with his whole army, they sent another embassy to beseech him that he would moderate his displeasure and would withdraw the Volscian army, and then make any proposals he thought best for both parties. The Romans would make no concessions to menaces, but if it were his opinion that the Volscians ought to have any favor shown them upon laying down their arms, they might obtain all they could in reason desire. The reply of Marcius was that he should make no answer to this, as general of the Volscians, but in the quality still of a Roman citizen, he would advise and exhort them, as the case stood, not to carry it so high, but to think rather of just compliance and return to him before 3 days were at an end with the ratification of his previous demands. Otherwise, they must understand that they could not have any further freedom of passing through his camp upon idle errands. When the ambassadors were come back and acquainted the Senate with the answer, seeing the whole state now threatened as it were by a tempest, and the waves ready to overwhelm them, they were forced, as we say in extreme perils, to let down the sacred anchor. A decree was made that the whole order of their priests, those who initiated in the mysteries or had the custody of them, and those who, according to the ancient practice of the country, divined from birth, should all and every one of them go in full procession to Marcius with their pontifical array and the dress and habit which they respectively used in their several functions, and should urge him, as before, to withdraw his forces, and then treat with his countrymen in favor of the Volscians. He consented so far, indeed, as to give the deputation admittance to his camp, but granted nothing at all, nor so much expressed himself more mildly, but without capitulating or receding, bade them once and for all choose whether they would yield or fight, since the old terms were the only terms of peace. No negotiations. No negotiations. When this solemn application proved ineffectual, the priests, too, returning unsuccessful, they determined to sit still within the city and keep watch about their walls, intending only to repulse the enemy should he offer to attack them, and placing their hopes chiefly in time and in extraordinary accidents of fortune. As to themselves, they felt incapable of doing anything for their own deliverance. Mere confusion and terror and ill-boding reports possessed the whole city. Till at last the thing happened not unlike what we so often find represented without, however, being accepted as true by people in general in Homer. On some great and unusual occasion we find him say, "But him the blue-eyed goddess did inspire," and elsewhere, "But some immortal turned my mind away to think what others of the deed would say." And again, "Were't his own thought or were't a God's command?" People are apt, in such passages, to censure and disregard the poet, as if, by the introduction of mere impossibilities and idle fictions, he were denying the action of a man's own deliberate thought and not free choice, which is not in the least the case in Homer's representation, where the ordinary, probable, and habitual conclusions that common reason leads to are continually ascribed to our own direct agency. He certainly says frequently enough, "But I consulted with my own great soul," or as in another passage, "He spoke, Achilles with quick pain possessed, resolved two purposes in his strong breast," and a third, "Yet never to her wishes won the just mind of the brave Bellerophon." But where the act is something out of the way and extraordinary, and seems in a manner to demand some impulse of divine possession and sudden inspiration to account for it, here he does introduce divine agency, not to destroy, but to prompt the human will, not to create in us another agency, but offering images to stimulate our own images that in no sort of or kind make our action involuntary, but give occasion rather to spontaneous action, aided and sustained by feelings of confidence and hope. For either we must totally dismiss and exclude divine influences from every kind of causality and origination in what we do, or else what other way can we conceive in which divine aid and cooperation can act? Certainly we cannot suppose that the divine beings actually literally turn our bodies and direct our hands, and that our feet and our feet this way or that to do what is right, it is obvious that they must actuate the practical and elective element of our nature by certain initial occasions, by images presented to the imagination and thoughts suggested to the mind, such either as to excite to it too, or avert and we withhold it from any particular course. In the perplexity which I have described, the Roman women went, some to other temples, but the greater part, and the ladies of the highest rank, to the altar of Jupiter Capitolinus. Among these suppliants was Valeria, sister to the great Poplicola, who did the Romans eminent service both in peace and in war. Poplicola himself was now deceased, as is told in the history of his life, but Valeria lived still and enjoyed great respect and honor at Rome, her, her life and conduct no way disparaging her birth. She suddenly seized, with a sort of instinct or emotion of mind which I have described, and happily lighting, not without divine guidance, on the right expedient, rose herself, and bade the others rise, and went directly to them to the house of Volumnia. Mommy, his mother, the mother of Marcius, and coming in and finding her sitting with her daughter-in-law with her little grandchildren on her lap, Valeria, then surrounded by her female companions, spoke in the name of all. We that now make our appearance, O Volumnia, and you, Virgilia, are come as mere women to women, not by direction of the Senate, or an order from the consuls, or the appointment of any other magistrate, but the divine being himself, as I conceive, moved to compassion by our prayers, prompted us to visit you in a body, and request a thing on which our own and the common safety depends, and which, if you consent to it, will raise your glory above that of the daughters of the Sabines, who won over their fathers and their husbands from mortal enmity to peace and friendship. Arise, and come with us to Marcius. Join our supplication, and bear for your country this true and just testimony on her behalf, that notwithstanding the many mischiefs that have been done to her, yet she has never outraged you, nor so much as thought of treating you ill in all her resentment, but does now restore you to say you safe into his hands, though there be small likelihood she should obtain from him any equitable terms. The words of Valeria were seconded by acclamations of the other women, to which Volumnia made answer, I and Virgilia, my countrywomen, have an equal share with you all in the common miseries, and we have the additional sorrow, which is wholly ours, that we have lost the merit and good fame of Marcius, and see his person confined rather than protected by the arms of the enemy. Yet I account this the greatest of all misfortunes, if indeed the affairs of Rome be sunk. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us once again to the end of the next exciting episode of the astounding chapter of the scintillating section of the saga of the episode of Plutarch by the reading cow from another world on a planet reading bedtime stories thing that this is. Tune in again next time, and until then, goodbye.